Okay, we are on page 38 of the Eternal Companion. And remember that, page 38. Swami Subodhananda was sent with Maharaj on this pilgrimage to make sure that he didn't leave the body. And the two Swamis continued their journey and reached Panchavati by the river Godavari, where Sita and Rama are traditionally supposed to have lived during their exile. There is a temple dedicated to them. Here, Brahmananda felt and saw the living presence of these two divine incarnations while chanting the holy name. He became absorbed in samadhi for 3 days and 3 nights. During these periods, Swami Subodhananda used to watch over Maharaj with mingled joy and anxiety. He realized the danger that Maharaj might pass out of the body while in samadhi and not return to earthly life, and he was careful to prevent this. I think someone's not muted because I'm hearing noises from someone. From Panchavati, they went on to Dwarka, the well-known place of pilgrimage, situated on the bank of the sacred river Gomati. In this river, pilgrims bathe in order to acquire merit, paying a tax for the privilege. But neither Maharaj nor Subodhananda had any money. A rich merchant noticed this and, recognizing them as holy men, offered to pay their tax. But Maharaj refused. He did not wish to buy religious merit and preferred to take his bath in the nearby ocean. This impressed the merchant so much that he also refused to pay the tax and went to bathe with the two Swamis. He invited them to his residence and entertained them for 3 days. But when he offered them money for their further travels, Maharaj refused to accept it. The merchant then offered to give them letters of introduction to his agents in different parts of the country, so their comfort would be assured wherever they went. But Maharaj refused this offer also. "I need nothing from anybody," he said. "The Lord is my only refuge. He will look after us." The merchant gave him a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, which was gladly accepted. From Dwarka, they visited various places of pilgrimage and finally reached Vrindavan. During the second visit to the holy city, Maharaj wrote Balaram the following letter: "Who can fathom the workings of God? Who could know his divine play? Man remains subject to happiness and misery as long as he is bound by karma. This is the lot of every man, no matter whether he is learned or ignorant, good or wicked. Rare indeed is he who has attained unalloyed bliss. Only that man who is free from all cravings can find unending joy. There is more misery than happiness in this world. Most people live in misery. God the Father is loving and kind. Who can explain why his children suffer? Man suffers because of his ignorance. This ignorance is his sense of ego. When a man is free from this egoism, surrendering his life, his mind, and his intellect at the blessed feet of the Lord of all, renouncing all that he calls his own, then is he blessed indeed. That man is truly happy. Of himself, man can accomplish nothing. There is only one thing to be done: pray to God and pray unceasingly. Thus we may forget the ego altogether and continually remember that God alone is real, that God alone is the truth, that then only can we be freed from ignorance. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, "How many love God as they love their own kith and kin? How many even want to love him? The mind is created out of those three gunas, which also make up the outer world. Because of this, the mind finds delight in dwelling on worldly thoughts. This is the very nature and stuff of the mind. It is only through divine grace that a man can withdraw his mind from the external world and keep it fixed on God's holy feet. I pray to the Lord that I may be completely freed from consciousness of the physical world. Bless me that I may remain absorbed in the lotus feet of the Guru. That is the one desire of my heart. Here in Vrindavan, Brahmananda lived in a state of continuous ecstasy, almost entirely losing his consciousness of the physical world. His brother disciple lovingly watched over him, but Brahmananda rarely spoke to him. His mind dwelt constantly in another realm. Subodhananda would beg food for him from door to door and place it silently in a corner of his brother's cell. At a regular hour, Brahmananda would rise from meditation in order to eat something. But if Subodhananda was late and he did not find the food in the usual place, he did not mind. He simply returned to his meditation and ate nothing until the next day. Sometimes Subodhananda would collect a rather more luxurious meal with curries of various kinds. But he noticed that Brahmananda satisfied his hunger from one of the dishes and left the rest untouched. He did this not because he was deliberately practicing any austerity or mortification of the flesh, but because he was so completely absorbed in the thought of God that the taste for food or any other sense object had left him. He ate only to keep the body alive. In later years, Maharaj used to say, "It is easy to practice austerity by not allowing the mind to come into contact with sense objects, but it is hard to get rid of the mental craving itself. And of all cravings, the subtle desire of the organ of taste is the most difficult to overcome. A man loses this craving only when he is in a high spiritual state." Seeing Maharaj thus absorbed in contemplation and neglecting food and sleep, Subodhananda one day asked him, "Why do you live so strictly? You are the spiritual son of God incarnate. He has already done everything for you. Through his grace you have attained samadhi. Then why do you still have to sit like a beggar, begging for the Lord's grace?" "What you say is true," Maharaj answered. "The Master did everything for us, but still I find a lack within. This proves that we need repeated practice in order to make the state of samadhi natural and habitual to us. You know, Uddhava was a devoted disciple and friend of Sri Krishna. Through his grace, he realized God. And yet, Sri Krishna sent him to the Himalayas to live in solitude and contemplation." Vijay Krishna Goswami, a well-known saint who was living in Vrindavan at this time, asked Brahmananda the same question. He replied simply, "I am only trying to become established in that vision of God, which I received through my Master's grace." Vijay Krishna and Maharaj would often meet and talk together about God. In time, Subodhananda himself became eager to live in solitude and practiced austerities. So with the blessings and permission of Maharaj, he went to Hardwar at the foot of the Himalayas. Left alone in Vrindavan, Maharaj had no time to feel lonely. For again, he plunged into the consciousness of God. Suddenly, one day, he saw in a vision the shining form of his beloved brother disciple Balaram standing before him. On his face was a heavenly smile. Gradually, his form merged into the light of the divine realm. Next day, Maharaj received the news that Balaram had passed away. At first, he felt a pang of grief, for he loved Balaram dearly. Then he realized that his sorrow was also a form of attachment. More strongly than ever, he felt a desire to forget the things of the world and plunge deeper into the inner kingdom of God. He left Vrindavan and began to walk toward Hardwar. That's quite a distance in India, especially on foot. At Hardwar, Maharaj was overwhelmed by the grandeur and beauty of the Himalayas and of the Ganges running its course at their feet. 2 miles from Hardwar is the quiet little village of Kankal, sanctified by the presence of many monks belonging to various orders, who go there to lead contemplative lives. There, Maharaj settled in a little hut not far from the Ganges. The present Ramakrishna Mission Home of Service is now situated on that very spot. Swamis Vivekananda, Turiyananda, Sardananda, Subodhananda, and other monastic disciples of the Master were then leading contemplative lives at Rishikesh in the same neighborhood. It was not long before they learned that Brahmananda was at Kankal, and they all went to visit him. Vivekananda wanted to go to Delhi and asked Maharaj and the rest of his brother disciples to accompany him. Maharaj could not refuse any wish of Swamiji's, but first he wanted to visit Swami Akhandananda, another brother disciple who was living in Meerut. To Meerut, therefore, they all went and spent some memorable days in meditation and study, happy to be in one another's company. Then Swamiji left for Delhi alone. The rest of them followed later. The lives of holy men, and especially their travels, must often appear curiously aimless to the ordinary observer. Ever obedient to the voice of God within them, they make no fixed plans as worldly people do. All their intentions are subject to unexpected change. No sooner were the Swamis gathered in Delhi than Vivekananda told them that he must go on alone. The inner voice commanded him to seek solitude. We shall meet again when the Lord wills, he told his brothers as he said goodbye. Maharaj now asked Swami Turiyananda to accompany him on his pilgrimage. The Swami readily agreed, which pleased Maharaj very much, for Sri Ramakrishna had once told him to keep company with Brother Hari. In Hari, Turiyananda, devotion and knowledge were harmoniously developed. Deeply learned in the scriptures, he lived a life of great austerity and immaculate purity. Sri Ramakrishna used to speak of him as a man of renunciation, strictly embodying the ideal of the Gita. The two Swamis now traveled together, mostly on foot, and visited many sacred temples in the northern part of India. Turiyananda has told us that whenever Maharaj entered any shrine, he would be filled with ecstatic devotion for that particular aspect of God to which the temple was dedicated, and that ultimately he would have direct vision of the living deity within that temple. In later years, when Maharaj was asked by a disciple if the gods and goddesses are real, he answered, "The one Godhead has many spiritual forms. All these forms are real. A seer can see them and talk to them." After nearly 2 years of pilgrimage, the Swamis arrived in Bombay. There they met Kalipada Ghosh, a devoted disciple of the Master who lived in that city. A joyful surprise awaited them, for at Kalipada's house was Swamiji himself. Since the parting at Delhi, they had known nothing of his whereabouts. Swamiji was now preparing for his first journey to the United States of America. Before embarking, he was requested to go and bless the newborn Prince of Khetri. Brahmananda and Turiyananda went with him on the train as far as the Abu Road station. While Vivekananda was with the prince, they visited Mount Abu, where there's a beautiful Jain temple. A few days later, they returned to the station in time to exchange a few words with Swamiji as his train passed through. This meeting was very short. Swamiji hastily told Turiyananda, "Please go back to the Bharanagore monastery. You are wanted there. Let Raja live alone." Turiyananda had no time to explain to Swamiji that he could not leave Maharaj alone just then. Brahmananda's spiritual consciousness was tuned so high that he had no regard for his body and could not look after it. So they remained together, and the two of them returned to Mount Abu, where they lived a life of contemplation. Turiyananda begged food for his brother and watched over him just as Subodhananda had done. After some time, Maharaj felt that they should return to Vrindavan. Here, Turiyananda experienced a mood of ecstatic joy. "I'm not going to beg any food today," he told Maharaj. "Let us see if Radha, the Holy Mother of Vrindavan, will feed us." They sat down to meditate. Day and night passed for both in blissful absorption without any consciousness of hunger or thirst. Next morning, as they rose from their meditation, they saw a devotee approaching them with quantities of food. By this time, they were both hungry and ate with great relish. After a few days in Vrindavan, they went to Lake Kushum, a solitary place near the holy city. On the lake shore, there are huts where monks can pass their days in solitude and contemplation. There, the Swamis lived for some months, completely forgetting the outer world. Swami Turiyananda told me of an interesting experience Maharaj had at Lake Kushum. For several nights in succession, as he sat down to meditate, he was disturbed by peculiar noises and by the falling of pebbles and dust around him. At length, Maharaj saw the spirit of a dead man standing before him. "Why are you disturbing me like this?" he asked. The spirit admitted that he had been trying to attract the Swami's attention and begged Maharaj to liberate him from his pitiful condition. Maharaj replied that he did not know how to do this. "You are a holy man," the spirit told him. "If you will just pray for my release, I shall be liberated." Maharaj did as he was asked. During his stay at Lake Kushum, Maharaj had the habit of rising at midnight and spending the rest of the night in meditation. One night, however, he felt tired and overslept. After a while, someone gave him a push and aroused him. At first, he thought that this must be Swami Turiyananda. Then he saw a luminous figure in the dress of a Vaishnava saint standing beside him and counting his beads. After this, the figure appeared almost every night at midnight and joined him in his meditation. Later, in describing this incident to his disciples, Maharaj remarked, "Many holy men, after leaving the physical body, live in the subtle spiritual bodies and help earnest religious aspirants in different ways." Toward the end of the year in 1893, Turiyananda received a letter from a brother disciple describing Swamiji's success in America and requesting him to come back to the monastery, which had now been moved from Bharanagore to Ulambazar. Turiyananda read the contents of the letter to Maharaj and asked him for his advice. Maharaj agreed that he ought to return. Don't trouble about me," he said. "Go back to the monastery. You are needed there to do the work of the Lord." So Turiyananda unwillingly took his departure, and Maharaj remained alone a year in Vrindavan. During this period, he sometimes took a vow not to ask for food or other necessities of life from anyone. Generally, an unknown devotee brought food to his door, but sometimes there would be days when he had nothing. Once, while he was sitting in silence, a stranger laid a warm new blanket beside him. A few moments later, another stranger came by and took the blanket away. Maharaj sat still, smiling to himself as he watched the strange play of the Divine Mother. During the special festivities in memory of Sri Krishna, Brahmananda joined the devotees at a nearby temple. The crowd was chanting the name of God and singing Krishna's praises before the shrine. An aged holy man of the Vaishnava sect was sitting in one corner, counting his beads. Suddenly he turned toward Maharaj and beckoned him to approach, indicating with affectionate gestures that he should sit down beside him. The two began to meditate. As Maharaj became absorbed, he felt the Vaishnava touch his head with his beads. He did this repeatedly, and each time as Brahmananda received the saint's touch, the hair on his body stood on end, and he experienced an ecstatic joy. By constant practice throughout these years of pilgrimage, Maharaj had at last achieved his aim. The state of samadhi was now his own possession. He had won it for himself, and he dwelt in it continually. Even in the periods of his normal consciousness, there was, he said, a fullness of God in his heart. All around him, wherever he went, nature seemed to vibrate with joy. Established at last and forever in the consciousness of God, he felt ready to answer the call of worldly duty. One day, quite suddenly, he left for Calcutta, carrying that heavenly joy within his heart. I think before we start on the next chapter, which is President of the Order, are there any questions or comments? Do you remember in the Gospel when Ramakrishna kept saying, don't let Maharaj stay. If he becomes very ill in Vrindavan, he may leave his body forever, realize who he is. So with him going back to Vrindavan, I'm sure some of his brother disciples were worried about the same thing, which is why they kept such a close eye on him, because they wanted him around, and Swamiji had much work for him to do as the first president of the order. Any comments or questions? Okay.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
Suzanne.
Yeah, Suzanne.
Back a few pages when Maharaj started to feel grief at the death of his friend.
Yeah, Balaram.
That was described as attachment.
Yes.
Is that sentiment something that I ought to embrace?
It's kind of odd. There are 8 fetters to liberation, according to the scriptures. And one of those fetters is grief. So it was always hard for me to understand that. But I think I don't know. I think I got a better understanding of it when Swami Prabhavananda died. I was extremely attached to him. And by the grace of God, none of us really felt grief. There was kind of a bubble of joy that took over. And I think when any of us experience the death of close family members. I think by that time I had realized that if you hold on to them with your grief, it actually, because of the love you have between the two, that you can hold them from their journey into the infinite. So yes, I mean, grief, wish them well, you don't stop loving them, but to hang on to them with grief, that your own sorrow impedes your growth and theirs, is my understanding.
Thank you.
Can't say that's the whole truth, but that's my understanding at this point in time.
Krishnaprana, wasn't it Swami Brahmananda, or was it another direct disciple that said that once the guru passes, you actually are closer because there's nothing to separate you from that person?
I don't know who said it, but I know it's true. I do know that without the physical being, there is no separation, because you actually, in so many ways, are closer. Mm-hmm. Because there isn't the barrier of the physical body.
I think it was Brahmananda, yeah.
I think we'll probably find it in the Eternal Companion mm-hmm. as we go along, yeah. So, okay, now does everyone know, I think most of you are members, it's the annual members meeting on Saturday, and it's via Zoom, and it's at 10:30 in the morning on Saturday. So read the members letter or the emails and please attend. This Sunday, Pravrajika is giving a lecture, The Relevance of Rama. Vespers is open for in-person, Thursday, Friday, Saturday from 6 to 6:45. And Saturday evening at 5 o'clock, we'll still have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna reading. And now just a note from the convent. We had a bear go through our property last night. It was amazing. Yeah, it knocked down 2 of Stephen's beehives, and it actually got into a bag of fertilizer in our backyard. Knocked down a couple of Enrique's, or went into his garbage cans. We thought it was a raccoon, but it was a bear. So keep your eyes open, those of you who live up in these areas. All right, we'll end with a chant. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Order. See you Friday.